January 3, 2018. Chandigarh, India. Journalist Rachna Khaira sits at her desk, staring at her phone in disbelief. She's just been offered something impossible: access to the personal information of over 1 billion people for the price of a cheap dinner. 500 rupees, about $7. That's all it costs to buy unrestricted access to India's entire population. She has no idea she's about to expose the largest data breach in human history. This is the story of how the world's biggest biometric database was hacked and how the government tried to silence the journalist. Let's rewind to 2009. India launches Aadhar, the world's most ambitious digital identity project. The promise? Give every Indian citizen a unique 12-digit number linked to their fingerprints, iris scans, and personal details. No more fake identities, no more benefit fraud, just one system to rule them all. By 2018, over 1.1 billion Indians, that's 90% of the entire population, had enrolled. Their fingerprints, eye scans, names, addresses, phone numbers, everything stored in one massive government database. But what they didn't know was that their most private information was being sold like vegetables in a market.
Back to that WhatsApp message. Rachna Khaira, working for the Tribune newspaper, had been tipped off about people selling Aadhar data online. At first, she didn't believe it. How could someone hack into the government's most secure system? But the seller was confident. "Send me any Aadhar number," they said, "and I'll show you everything about that person." So she tested it. She gave them a random 12-digit number. Within minutes, she had a complete stranger's photo, name, address, phone number, email, everything. The seller wasn't bluffing. They had cracked open India's digital vault.
But this wasn't just some teenager in his bedroom. This was organized crime at a massive scale. The hackers had figured out the system's biggest weakness: third-party access points. See, Aadhar wasn't just a government database. Hundreds of companies and agencies had direct connections to verify people's identities. Banks, gas companies, telecom providers, even small government offices. Each connection was supposed to be secure, but many weren't, and the hackers knew exactly where to look. They found their golden ticket in the most unlikely place: in Dane, a government-owned gas company. Someone had built a website with a direct pipeline to the Aadhar database, and it had zero security. No passwords, no encryption, no monitoring. The access code was literally INDADS Aadhar Secure Status. Basically, India Aadhar Secure Status. It was like putting a sticky note with your bank PIN on your credit card. This single vulnerability gave hackers unlimited access to query anyone's personal information anytime they wanted. But the gas company wasn't the only way in. The government had created something called a grievance redressal system, basically a way for officials to look up people's data when they had complaints or issues. The problem? These official login credentials were being sold like concert tickets. Government employees, agents, even random middlemen were selling their access passwords to anyone with cash. For 300 rupees more, buyers could even get software to print fake Aadhar cards. It was identity theft as a service. Meanwhile, the man in charge of protecting all this data was living in denial. The Unique Identification Authority of India, or UIDAI, kept insisting their system was impregnable. They claimed it was protected by 13 feet high and 5 feet thick walls of security. But those walls had more holes than Swiss cheese, and criminals were walking right through them. Every day, thousands of illegal queries were being made. Personal information was being downloaded, copied, and sold, and nobody at UIDAI seemed to notice or care. This is where Rachna Khaira comes back into the story. After confirming that the data breach was real, she knew she had to investigate further. She posed as a buyer and traced the entire network. What she found was shocking.
The sellers weren't just random hackers, they were part of an organized network with connections inside the system. They had customer service, bulk discounts, even technical support. It was like Amazon, but for stolen identities. The investigation revealed something even more disturbing. This wasn't just about accessing data. Criminals were using this information for real harm. With someone's Aadhar details, they could open bank accounts, take out loans, apply for SIM cards, even steal government benefits meant for the poor. Millions of Indians were unknowingly victims of identity theft, and they had no idea their most private information was being traded like a commodity. On January 3, 2018, the Tribune published Rachna Kaira's explosive investigation. The headline read, "Rupees 500, 10 minutes, and you have access to billion Aadhar details." The article detailed exactly how the breach worked, complete with screenshots and evidence. It should have been a wake-up call. Instead, it became a nightmare for the journalist who exposed it all. Rather than thanking Kaira for exposing the security holes, the government went after her. Within 72 hours, the UIDAI filed a police complaint against her, her editor, and the Tribune newspaper. They were charged with cheating, forgery, and unauthorized access to computer data, crimes that could land them in prison for years. The message was clear: don't expose government failures, or you'll pay the price. The charges against Kaira sparked outrage across India and around the world. Press freedom advocates called it a blatant attempt to silence journalism. Edward Snowden tweeted his support. The Editors Guild of India condemned the government's actions. Even international media organizations rallied behind her. But the government didn't back down. They insisted there was no breach, despite mountains of evidence proving otherwise. While the government was busy prosecuting journalists, the actual criminals were still out there, selling data. Security researchers kept finding new vulnerabilities. In 2019, another massive leak was discovered, this time involving 5.8 million customer records from the same Indian gas company. The hackers had embedded Aadhar numbers directly in website URLs, making them searchable on Google. Anyone could find people's personal information just by typing the right search terms. But the problems went deeper than just technical vulnerabilities. A 2022 government audit revealed systemic failures in how Aadhar was managed. Poor quality biometric data led to authentication failures. People couldn't access their own bank accounts because their fingerprints weren't reading properly. The system meant to include everyone was excluding millions. Meanwhile, duplicate Aadhar numbers were being issued to the same person, creating chaos in the database. The scale of this breach cannot be overstated. We're talking about 1.1 billion people, nearly 1/6 of humanity. Their biometric data, the most intimate and unchangeable information about their bodies, was compromised. Unlike passwords or credit card numbers, you can't just get new fingerprints. Once biometric data is stolen, you're vulnerable for life. Security experts called it the largest data breach in human history, and they weren't exaggerating. The international implications were enormous. Countries around the world were watching India's biometric experiment. Many had similar projects planned. But the Aadhar breach became a cautionary tale about the dangers of centralized data collection. How do you protect the biometric information of a billion people? India's answer seemed to be, you don't. You just pretend everything is fine and prosecute anyone who says otherwise. The Supreme Court of India eventually stepped in. In September 2018, just months after the breach was exposed, they issued a landmark ruling on Aadhar's constitutional validity. While they allowed the system to continue, they imposed strict limitations. Private companies could no longer force customers to provide Aadhar numbers. The government's data sharing powers were curtailed. And most importantly, they mandated stronger data protection measures. But the damage was already done.
By then, millions of Indians' personal information had been floating around the dark web for months. Cybersecurity firms were finding Aadhar data for sale on underground forums. Identity thieves had a field day. The immutable nature of biometric data meant that victims would remain vulnerable forever. You can change your password, but you can't change your DNA. The government tried to implement damage control measures. They introduced virtual ID numbers that people could use instead of their real Aadhar numbers. They limited how much data third parties could access. They promised better monitoring and security. But critics argued it was too little, too late. The horse had already bolted, and they were trying to close the stable door.
Meanwhile, Rachna Khaira faced months of legal harassment. Police investigations, court hearings, threats. All for doing her job as a journalist. The irony was bitter. The person who exposed the crime was being treated like a criminal, while the actual criminals remained free. It took 3 years for the case against her to be quietly dropped. By then, the story had largely faded from public memory. But the Aadhar saga didn't end there. New vulnerabilities kept being discovered. In 2023, cybersecurity firms reported that personal information of 815 million Indians, including Aadhar details, was being sold on the dark web. The sellers claimed to have passport information, voter ID details, and complete demographic profiles. They were essentially offering a one-stop shop for Indian identity theft. The government's response remained predictably tone-deaf. They continued to deny that any significant breach had occurred. They blamed third-party misuse and claimed their core systems remained secure. But security experts weren't buying it. The fundamental architecture of Aadhar, a centralized database with hundreds of access points, made it inherently vulnerable to attack. Today, as we look back at the Aadhar breach, several lessons emerge. First, the scale of modern data collection creates unprecedented risks. When you put 1 billion people's biometric data in one place, you create the world's most attractive target for criminals. Second, government secrecy and lack of accountability make these risks worse. By prosecuting journalists instead of fixing problems, India turned a security failure into a democratic crisis. Third, the immutable nature of biometric data makes breaches especially dangerous. When your credit card is stolen, you get a new one. When your biometric data is stolen, you're stuck with the consequences forever. And finally, the international implications of such breaches extend far beyond national borders. In our connected world, a data breach in one country can affect people everywhere. The Aadhar breach stands as a cautionary tale for the digital age. It shows what happens when governments prioritize ambition over security, secrecy over transparency, and punishment over accountability. 1.1 billion people paid the price for these failures with their privacy and security. Their biometric data remains compromised to this day, a permanent reminder of one of the biggest cybersecurity disasters in human history. As for Rachna Khaira, she eventually received recognition for her brave journalism, winning several awards for her Aadhar investigation. But the broader questions her reporting raised remain unanswered. How do we balance the benefits of digital identity systems with the risks they create? How do we protect people's privacy in an age of mass surveillance? And how do we ensure that journalists can expose government failures without fear of retaliation? The Aadhar story is far from over. The system continues to operate, covering over 1.3 billion Indians today. New vulnerabilities are still being discovered, and somewhere out there, criminals are still profiting from the biggest data breach in history. The question isn't whether another massive breach will happen,
it's when, and whether we'll be ready for it. If this story taught us anything, it's that in the digital age, our most private information is only as secure as the weakest link in the chain. And sometimes, that weakest link isn't technical, it's human. The failure to listen to warnings, to fix problems, and to hold powerful institutions accountable. That's the real vulnerability that hackers exploit. And that's the one we need to fix if we want to prevent the next Aadhar from happening.